Hello, Endeavor here. I've been on a hiatus from the internet for the last few weeks. First, I wanted to announce that I'm getting back into making edited videos and I'm currently working on my next video. It'll be on the novel Frankenstein, so keep an eye out for that. To hold you over until then, here's a mirror of a live stream that I did with a guy that's just getting into the right-wing sphere here on YouTube. His channel is called WanderingRusski, and I enjoyed the conversation that I had with him. So if you find our discussion interesting, head over to his channel and subscribe. I will link his channel down below. Hope you enjoy, and you'll be hearing from me again soon.
Okay, so I think we're on. Alrighty, so Privet Katila, yeah, хорошо, because today we have Endeavor, a right-wing reactionary from Canada. It's very interesting. I think we're gonna have a very interesting discussion. So I had I guess we were just discussing we were gonna discuss this before the live before going live, but this was gonna be the first question. So I was gonna ask what your ideology was and how you got to your ideology. So I'll ask you, and then I'll explain what my ideology is. So kind of explain just kind of what's your ideology, and then how you got there.
Yeah, no problem. I'll introduce myself in Russian since you did that too. Здравствуйте, меня зовут Endeavor, я из Канады. У меня YouTube канал. Я говорю об политике и культура и история. Спасибо за приглашение меня.
Oh, you know Russian? Damn.
A little bit. No, I'm not good enough that I can do the entire stream in it. But
oh, wow,
anyway,
damn.
My YouTube channel is called Endeavor. It's generally focused on right-wing politics. My position is what I consider myself as neo-reactionary. So the focus of my channel is neo-reactionary thought, or NRX, as you might call it. And it's generally it's like a way of looking at the world through kind of a pre-enlightenment lens, and one that's separate from liberalism, really. And it's just kind of a different way to look at the world through a right-wing lens. And generally, I focus on things like history, culture, politics. And I've been mostly, I started off talking about, I did a lot of things on, the various topics that a lot of people discuss, things like immigration, Islam, stuff like that. But I kind of am trying to move away from that into more cultural things, because I find that kind of gets me depressed a lot. So yeah, really what I'm doing right now is I've been looking at a lot of history recently, or a lot of culture. I like to take parts out, certain things that I enjoy. So I made a video about the Canadian settlers, and really like how their story really connects with me. I made one about a video about Hungary. I made a video about one of my family members who is of the opposite political persuasion as me, and kind of how we see the world differently. And yeah, that's really what the focus of my channel is. It's just looking at culture, politics, history through the lens of neo-reaction.
And how would you describe how you got to that point? Were you like a libertarian earlier, and then you evolved into this, or were you, or how did you get to the ideas you had now? Like, what got you into this point?
Oh, that's actually a good question, because with a lot of people, you hear that like they were liberal, then they were libertarian, then they became like alt-right or something like that. For me, I think that I was bound to end up at the political position I am right now. I think I was predestined for it, because my interest in politics really kind of derived from my love of history, and that all started with stories that that I heard from a war veteran when I was young. And when I was in my teenage years, I developed a love of history, and I started off my politics as really kind of like, I would just consider myself a normie conservative, but I didn't really have a way of expressing like my actual views of the world. Like I kind of knew at the time that it didn't really, it wasn't a very complete one, and it was really not one that I was not satisfied with. but it was really the only political expression that I knew of at that time. That it was the one that like kind of was the closest to it, but it's still not a very good fit. And when I started to discover kind of the more right wing, what you might call dissident right, whatever, or worldviews, and especially neo reactionary thought, it really meshed with the things that I'd say the worldview that I had, and it really explained the world to me in a way that I think made the most sense from my perspective, and that's why I arrived at that position.
That's yeah, I made a video out, one of my second video that when I started turning politics on this channel was like I called my political journey.
Okay.
Essentially I started out as like a moderate conservative.
Okay.
I became I guess what made me more like I became like this libertarian anarchist. It was kind of like the NSA spying, and kind of like I what underpins all my ideology is kind of this anti-elitist sort of I kind of dissuade like people. I kind of have this distrust toward people who think things are okay. I kind of like, okay, I kind of blame the government for being, just kind of they're the source of our problems. And then I kind of had this dark days when I became like an atheist, and I kind of started looking in like these anti-social justice warrior channels and that. So then I moved there, and then when Bernie Sanders came along, I became like this social democrat leftist. And then I became, for a while, I never really flirted with authoritarian leftism, but I flirted with like we'll become a one world government, and we'll all hold hands, and we'll see past our differences, and, we'll collaborate and become like a Star Trek, gay space communism type thing,
Yeah.
And then I never would, I mean, I was never like a, Stalinist or a communist, I don't think, but I kind of was that, I was, into that big thing, into leftism. And then after Bernie Sanders fell out, I joined. I kind of moved toward Trump because Bernie Sanders got fucked over by Hillary Clinton, obviously, and I kind of got persuaded because the thing with Donald Trump was that he added like an economic populist right into it, so I kind of was adopting into it. But then, what really got me into it was the migration crisis into Europe, constant Islamic terror attacks, and it was just a perfect storm. It was just Donald Trump just was voicing these thoughts, and I think it just kind of made me look. So it was because they had like they were talking about trade and infrastructure, and I kind of looked into it, and then I looked into how they I'm like, okay, and then I guess you could say I was red pill. I'm like, oh wow, look what happened in Rotherham in England. Oh my, look what happened in the Cologne sex attacks in Germany. And let me look at, oh shit, the immigration, the immigration trends are so high, they're going to replace the population. It's just, you don't really think about that. And you just kind of, because it's like, oh, well, these sex attacks are happening, these terror attacks are happening. It doesn't seem like this multicultural experiment is working out. And it's kind of, you start looking deep into that hole, and that's how I became, I guess, alt-right. And I kind of, and since then I've stayed in the right wing, political sphere, and I think I've and the thing is, I've kind of, over all these evolutions, I kind of kept like, I'm still, this is why I'm kind of, so to describe who I am, I've kind of always beat myself up and like, oh, am I really right wing? Because the thing is, like, I'm an economic Keynesian, I'm an environmentalist, some things, and I'm against endless wars, so there's a bunch of things that are associated with the American left, like being anti-war, being for, like, say, economic protectionism and all that. And the only thing I thought I really had in common with the right wing is immigration. But what I kind of figured out is that at the core of what it means to be right wing is this idea of, we embrace human nature. We embrace that we need strong social institutions and governmental institutions to help provide a sort of to make man into his better self. God, family, country. That's we need strong families are necessary. We need strong communities. We need strong I'm a traditionalist. I'm a nationalist, and I believe in traditional gender roles. Yes, there's male and female, and they're both different. There's different cultures, and they're different. There's different religions, they're different, and it's not all equal. And what got me really interested in your work is that you put a different narrative on how the right could combat the left-wing dominance. And because the way I describe it is that conservatives and progressives take a step forward to their utopian goal. Conservatives simply stay put, but we don't have a reactionary, like a right-wing reaction to go back to our traditional goals. We always take, like, for example, progressives take a step forward with homosexual rights. The conservatives might not repeal it, but like, okay, we're just going to stay put. We're not going to advance transsexual rights. And then progressives want to take a step forward. So they always move forward very slowly toward their goal. We never go back to where we want to be. So fundamentally, I believe in, human nature. I believe in, just we need a strong communal organizations and strong, these institutions in place to help make, how do you say it? Just it's not just like an individual kind of. There's more to it. We need strong morals and strong a sense of purpose and identity in our thing, and that's why. And as you said, I think it was inevitable. It might just be because of my past. History was always my most favorite subject. I always got straight A's in school for that, and I always played the Total War games, Civilization games. I was always into playing with toy soldiers. I just really had this fawning thing for the past, and I never really recognized it.
Yeah, and a lot of people kind of have that same journey. That a lot of people will wonder, am I really right wing? I think that kind of the fundamental thing is this kind of belief in a belief in order and a belief in a hierarchical, a belief in this that man is kind of an imperfect being and that he needs structure around him in order to make him a productive person, and that people have a striving for things like identity, like purpose, things like religion or nationalism and all that stuff. That's a real striving that people have. And I think that the difference would be someone on the left would have a more egalitarian vision of the world and a more, I don't want to say utopian, but their vision for the world is a lot more utopian. That they believe that human nature is fundamentally good, and that if you are able to structure the right society around it, you'll be able to change it.
Really. Yeah, and more importantly, that it's malleable, that you could just change human beings and becoming whatever you want it to be. That's why
you just need the right you just need the right institutions around them. They just need the right education.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's why I embrace this right-wing labels guy. I just don't think they're just fundamental things about human nature that are essential, that are just there, and you can't just change it. It's there's a reason why being male or female is a social construct, or races are a social construct, or just it's kind of, we have to kind of fight back against it. And the current right wing is completely inept in trying to do that. So I get what I wanted to, the next topic was kind of your how to make the right again. A new narrative for the right wing. And what got me interested is you're a new narrative for the right, and you kind of laid out a few ideas for it. So, we kind of, what would you describe would be a traditional, a real person on the right?
Well, as in the new narrative that I wanted to make, it's because you see, a civilization gives itself a narrative. It has a story about itself that justifies it justifies its course of action. It justifies who's in power. It justifies what's good and what's bad. And the problem we have is that for people on the right is that the narrative that we're living under right now fundamentally is a left-wing narrative. It is one that favors progressivism. The narrative is that we're progressing towards a more equal, more free, better society, and that through things like universal suffrage and feminism, gay marriage, multiculturalism.
The Whig theory of, or what was it, it's a certain view of history, we're progressing toward better. Yeah, Whig history.
Yes, and that's one of the parts of our civilizational narrative that we have. That we have this sense that as we're progressing towards this more equal, free society. And that the other thing we have is just this belief that human nature is just so malleable that the only reason that we can't achieve an egalitarian civilization is because of prejudice. It's because of racism, or it's because of sexism, or something like that. That, the only reason we can't achieve that is that we don't have the right institutions in place, and that the goal of our institutions needs to be to manufacture that equality. And yeah, there's various and that also maybe just like the highest good is just to have the maximum amount of material wealth and just the maximum amount of I don't even want to say freedom, because what does the word freedom mean? But like the minimum amount of like restrictions. So like, just being able to just do whatever you want, like that's considered good. Mm-hmm. And these are the various things that are really kind of pushing, various things that I looked at that are really kind of pushing our narrative in one direction. And I wanted to provide some alternatives for that. And a few of the ideas I presented would be that, an idea that human nature is not malleable, and that, we do need to have that man in nature is a violent creature, and he does need to have structure around him to compensate for that. And that, I think I made the point before that the goal is not to perfect it's not to change human nature, but to work with it and make him more and make him not as violent. Whereas progressivism flat out wants to change human nature. And another example would be like the narrative of cyclical history rather than of Whig history. And this is a big area of neo-reactionary thought. The notion that Whig history is actually, instead of actually like progress, it's actually civilizational decay. It's actually the foundations and the of civilization falling apart, because though they may make things appear to be more free or more equal, it makes the civilization long-term less stable. I mean, an example of this could be like, you could say like feminism makes, men and women more equal, and therefore it's progress. We're progressing towards something better. But then, the reactionary view is that it's actually, the gender dynamic falling apart. It's actually, the roles that men and women are required to fulfill in order to maintain your civilization. It's actually that falling apart. And you can look at that through things like divorce rates, birth rates, overall just dissatisfaction with life, men being feminized and women being, I guess, masculinized. I guess you could use the phrase. And the right-wing view of that is that it's really more of a civilizational decay rather than a progress towards something greater, towards something more free and equal. And yeah, that's what I tried to do with that series, was try to present an alternative vision that people on the right can look at the world and kind of answer a lot of the questions that they're given. Because one of the biggest problems is that for a long time, people on the right haven't been able to answer these questions. They haven't been able to present a vision as a real alternative to that of progressivism. It is just the one that we're gonna like look at history and yell stop. So we're not gonna actually push for anything, rather than kind of just slow things down, like you had said. Yeah, that's what I want to try to get at with that series.
Yeah, that's it's kind of like what I was referring to earlier. And I actually really I know this came from a meme, but it's like I don't know, it's like, strong men create good times create bad times create, what was it? Bad times create strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. And it's just a cycle. Instead of everything going toward I was watching some of your debates just like discussions with other YouTubers, and a big part that comes up a lot is the rise and fall of civilizations. And one thing I always make a comparison to with is like the Roman Empire, at least for the United States. Like, and we're this flagelling empire. The barbarians are at the gates, and our empire stretched thin. Our government's corrupt, and you could just see the parallels. We grew, and then we became this prosperous nation, and then we're losing what it means to that we're losing our sense of you kind of told, like, from Spain to like the Arabian Empire, you just kind of saw that nations rise and fall, empires
Yes.
rise and fall. It's not just like we keep getting better and better, and I think it's just, I think it's just, and I think what's going to happen is that because of technology and just because of our decadence, we might be able to put this facade for longer. We might last a little longer, but the crash is going to be a lot worse because we're so diluted by our material decadence that we don't see it coming until it's too late. And the what was the other, and the other thing you were saying is about human the thing about human freedom. The thing is, for me, like he said, what does freedom even mean? Like, are we really free? We're living in the most interconnected time in the history of our world. We have the most freedoms of all time. We have the most material positions, but yet, are we really free when families are breaking apart, when we have the highest suicide rates, the highest drug overdose rates? We connect to anyone around the world, and yet we feel lost without a sense of purpose and identity. And it's a bit of a contradiction. Like, how can that be? And it's, and we're losing this sort of, because, for me, freedom means, I think what makes us even more free. Freedom isn't like, oh, I get to take heroin, that's nice. No, that's not freedom. Freedom, for me, freedom is having a home you could call your own, a family you can, be safe, and, a next generation to push on your legacy, having a community, be part of something greater than yourself. That's what it means. And having a nation to be proud of, and you're part of this grander project, because it's not just, we're not atomized individuals. We're a part of each other, and we're not just a human race. There's groups of people, and each ethnic group has a right to have their own homeland. Denmark's for the Danes, Poland's for the Polish. It's just they have these right to have these lands for their own self-governments and self-determination. And it's something that makes them unique and equal. And in a weird way, even that's what makes the human race diverse in a way. And that's, but the left wants us to become this mongrelized, one world, with no culture. And the only culture we have is, the worshiping of Amazon products. And a little thing I was going to say earlier about the rise and fall of empires is that, as someone, you could just apply this to just your personal life. But so I was in United States Marine Corps boot camp for a little bit. I didn't pass it, but I'm now going to the Air Force boot camp. One thing I learned is that, a quote I made is, only through hell will we find heaven. And the purpose of that is that you have to suffer and you have to go through bad times in order to make the good times great again. You can't, if every day's a good day, then it's just a normal day. And it's kind of, you don't know what you have until you lose it. So I think, it might have to be essential for the West to actually go through this sort of transformational, not this like us being put, because if we, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So we have to push through this sort of tough times. And, if we become, and that's what happens. If we become so strong, we make this greatness come about it. And then when we give it to our descendants, it eventually, and we give them this great civilization, and then they just they're like, oh well, we could just kind of lay our guard down, and then that's where we are now. So that's kind of what I want to say.
Yeah, I think that for when you discuss the rise and fall of civilizations and great empires, I had a good discussion on my channel with On the Offensive.
Mm-hmm.
He has a great YouTube channel. About the essay by Sir John Glubb called "The Fate of Empires," and for anyone that's interested in these topics, I'd highly recommend reading that essay. It's very short, but it's very insightful. And what he goes over is really how empires rise and how they fall, and that it's not really because there's the cliche that people always say is every empire comes to an end, and that's true, but a lot of people don't really understand how it happens. What he points to is that there's when a great power originates, it often starts out as from an unexpected source. For example, no one would have thought that a couple of English settlers in these small colonies in Massachusetts and Virginia would eventually create the greatest and most powerful nation to ever exist. But that he says that when it starts out, there's really a drive. There's really a sense among men that they're driving towards something great, and that and it's always the best men that they start off with. They're always these ambitious, hardworking guys, the guys that would have settled the West in America, or the guys who would have made the trek out to California, or just all these amazing feats that they achieved. And and throughout that time, there's always a sense that, you're making yourself wealthy, yes, but you're doing it for something greater. There's a purpose that you're striving toward. And then what he says is that eventually they make themselves so wealthy that the purpose dies. That kind of civilizational drive dies off, and then it just becomes about money. It just becomes about accumulating as much wealth as possible, and then the sense of duty really begins to die off. And then eventually they become decadent when they're so used to wealth for such a long time that they become weak, really, and that they lose the ability to defend themselves and really the will to. And what I found fascinating also is that you can actually see that progressivism has reared its head in civilizations while they were on their decline, when they were wealthy, but not as confident. Similar things have happened. Like, for example, the late Roman Empire. And my Roman history is not excellent, but they began to grant citizenship to basically everyone, Roman citizenship, which was originally, just something that was very exclusive. That was just given out to basically everyone that they had conquered. And, they no longer had, the conquered peoples did not have the same loyalty to Rome that a Roman would have centuries prior, and they really didn't have the will to keep it up. And the really interesting a really interesting thing that John Glubb describes is the Arab Empire of Baghdad in the 9th century, when Baghdad became the richest city in the world. The parallels are really shocking to the present day. Like, for example, he points out that there was an influx of foreigners that, it was originally a city full of Arabs, but then eventually it became wealthy, and then Persians, Egyptians, Greeks, Turks, and so on all just started flooding into Baghdad. And he talks about that women began to occupy positions traditionally held by men. So like it even became kind of it even became feminist in a way. And he also points out that they had these singers who would play these erotic, sexually charged dance numbers on this instrument, and that there was a lax in sexual mores, and that there was a decline in religion. And it really is a lot like what we've seen happen in the West in the last 50 years. And this was under Islam. So, I really think that kind of progressivism, and really what we're seeing today, things like, LGBT, intersectional feminism, critical race theory, all this stuff. It's really that civilizational, civilizational decline, and really the falling apart of civilization that we've seen in great powers that fell. It's really reemerging in a modern context, and it's really quite shocking when you look at it. And for me, this is what just smashes the Whig view of history, because all these empires had a sense at one point that they had made it, that they had made it, and that they'll now spread their fortunes across the world. So nothing can ever happen to them because we're wealthy now, and eventually, and it just causes it to decline for many reasons. And a lot of that has to do with just people not losing that sense of duty that they had toward the empire that made it great to begin with.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that it wasn't the black transsexuals that made America great.
Yeah, surprisingly. That's what they tell us today, though. Yeah, but
yeah, and the thing with one thing what people have to realize is at least what I realize in the right wing, what we need to understand is that what we're trying to push is a giant cultural shift. A lot of people tend to think it's an international cabal of bankers and cultural Marxists that are ruining it. If we just get rid of them, everything will be fine. And for me, it's going to be a lot harder than that. It's, the people who are pushing, if you want to say that there are groups of people who are trying to push ideologies onto the Western world, we have to understand is that, it took time. They didn't just quickly do it. It had to be there had to be a lot of events that had to occur, and there had to be a lot of, they had to slowly creep upon it. It was a decades long process. It'd been going on for maybe even a century, you could say. So this is a long-term project. You can't just, so it has to accompany this giant shift. And a lot of people who watch, say, left-wing YouTubers, if they're watching this discussion, they're not going to be transformed immediately. You have to give them the seed to kind of break through, because they've been throughout their entire lives, in the media and the educational system, they've been brainwashed into this left-wing worldview, and that's why it's essential for people like you to bring up a new narrative to combat this idea. It has to accompany it with a giant shift in thinking. And as he said in the beginning of this live stream, it's like we have to get back to the roots of what makes our civilization, there's more to that. The purpose of civilization is to preserve, first of all, it's for the survival of the people. So individuals, they come together and they create groups, and, they survive, and they're trying to preserve what makes these groups different and unique. Mm-hmm. And that's what the purpose of nations. Preserving for Poland, for example, it would be a Polish language, a Polish identity with Polish people. And yes, there might be some national minorities that have been there or are a bit small, but that's not like it's not like, oh, it's a multicultural paradise. It's like 98% Polish or what. There's maybe some Germans on the west side, maybe some Russians or whatever. But that's what needs to accompany is this giant cultural shift, and it's going to take a long time. So that's what it's a long-term process to deconvert people. And I guess the next topic that I wanted to move on to is you were kind of needing moving toward it. And the thing with what makes the next topic, what I wanted to say is we need a new type of economy. And you were kind of mentioning it, kind of we got everything's about money, the materialism. And I think if I remember correctly, one thing that you mentioned as part of this narrative that we have is that everything's about money. What makes the GDP grow? One thing I found interesting so there's this Democratic candidate running for president. His name is Andrew Yang, and he wants to reorient. He calls it human-centered capitalism. So instead of measuring GDP, it measures human qualities. Happiness and family stability and the environmental and healthy and all that. So it's not because, for example, if he makes an example if let's say driverless cars, come about, that might shoot the profits up of the, of these multinational corporations. They don't have to hire the truckers, but all these truckers, in the Midwest, they might have they succumb to depression, mental illness, drug overdose, suicides. And, they just, the economy doesn't take into account this. And, yes, I will admit, yes, we live in the most, this international globalism, this globalized world we have brought about a lot of material prosperity, but at what cost? And so we kind of have to make a third position between market fundamentalism that in the mainstream right, at least in America, is just, oh, we worship the markets, and how do we move about that? What's the real, how do we approach the market in that?
Yeah, that is a big problem that we have. It's the the Ben Shapiro kind of view of the world that, you view everything in terms of economics. You view everything in terms of the market, and, you judge GDP as the be all and end all. And, I think that one of the major problems is that, the right's kind of undergone, 30 years of the, of neoliberal economic policy, and maybe even longer than that. And I think that, one thing that we have to get back to is an idea that, there is something greater than just wealth that we're working towards. We are trying to, the wealth is to maintain civilization. It's to maintain, European civilization as we've known it for so long. And that, and also that, it really doesn't work for many people. Like you pointed out that, maybe your GDP goes up by 2%, but is that worth it when all the truckers in the Midwest or the workers in somewhere like Ohio or Pennsylvania, if they lose their homes, if their families fall apart, if, they end up on unemployment benefits, is that 2% higher because you have slightly lower wages, is that really worth it? And no, it's not, because you might be making some people slightly richer, but at the same time, you're really like selling you're really selling your soul for that. And I'll never accept the argument like that. You should like destroy your civilization because it'll make you more wealthy. And it is kind of a mindset that we've fallen into in recent times. And that was actually identified as one of the signs of a empire in decline. It's that there's a sense that it's all about money. It's not about like preserving something higher. It's not about a higher purpose. It's about making money, and that's it.
Yeah, and there's a good quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's like, I'm not as last year I had $50 million. This year I have $52 million, but I'm not as happy as I'm not more happy because I have $2 million. And because the thing is, money isn't happy. It does not equate to. There's some people. There's. I don't want to go all Buddhist on this, but I think it's Buddhism. But it's like the attachment to like wanting material, like, oh, I need a computer, I need the newest phone, I need this and that. It's kind of like you have to make do with what you have, and it's kind of like this materialism of like, we need all these, because it's like because there's people in the world who have a lot, who live almost in poverty, but yet they seem to have, they have like a family they could take, they have they could be with, and they have like a sense of purpose and all that, and it's what's infinitely. And there was a tweet from this called the Duke on Twitter. He's like, and he said, things infinitely more important than money, profit, and the GDP. Family values, religious and moral values, community, tradition, national identity, sense of belonging, safe neighborhoods, health and fitness, nature and the environment. It's just, all these things. There's more. Like, okay, let's say you're not able to purchase the latest gadget or widget, but in return, let's say that it's a bit expensive because we put manufacturing back in our homeland. And I think the one thing about this international globalization is that it's a threat to national sovereignty itself, because what if say China just stops shipping stuff to us? Like, what if we can't grow our own food, or we can't make our own defense or food, or just our own stuff, like the main bare bones. Like, if we're all connected, that means if someone falls apart, we also get hurt by that. And I think it's just, I guess it's kind of like almost like slavery, being tied up in this like international cabal of entangling alliances and entangling treaties. And it's like liberating a country to be self-sufficient. And that's why nations should be self-sufficient. They should be able to grow their own food, make their own manufacturing and health and everything. And for me, that's why I was always critical about, or like, am I really right wing? Because like this is why I think Bernie Sanders and people like on the economic left are rising, because they realize there's this huge wealth and income inequality. A small group of people, and I don't think they're like intentional, like they're coming together as like, yes, let's destroy the family and let's destroy the nations. It's just that, well, they see that wealth and materialism is just more important to them. It doesn't damn the consequences. And it's just I don't think it's malevolent on their part. It's just that they're just getting richer off the backs of all of us, and that's why economic leftism is rising. But I think a counter to that is an economic right, because like, even if if the way you make strong, like a strong safety net, a strong welfare state or whatever, is a strong sense of identity and purpose. That was what we were doing earlier. We were mentioning how, because there was a study, I forgot who made it, but it was from a Harvard guy. It was like this 10-year-long study. He studied the effects of diversity on neighborhoods and communities, and they realized the more diverse it gets, the more it becomes more like people are less trusting. They vote less. They put in charity less.
Robert Putnam.
Yeah, Robert Putnam. Yeah, and he was like, I'm this left wing guy. I wanted this to prove that diversity works, but it just does not come from my research. And so in order for these these main, having healthcare for everyone, for giving, homes for everyone. The only way to do that is people having a shared sense of identity and having a stake in this grander project. And that's why, like, hey, maybe I will pay a little bit more in taxes if that means, if that means because I have my extended family is the nation, and I want to help my family, because I think that's the fundamental flaw of economic leftism, is that they want that, but they, if we live in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society and everyone's at each other's throats and everyone wants their own interest groups, no one's going to be willing to pay more taxes to give to a greater cause, because they don't feel connected to this greater cause.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, definitely. And I think that if you're aware of the YouTuber Morgoth from Morgoth's Review, do you know who that is?
Sadly, I do not. I need to look him up.
Oh, he's a great YouTuber. He's a friend of mine. I had him on my channel back in January. He wrote a great article, because he writes a blog and he has a channel about the amount of chicken that the world consumes, and that the way that people like Steven Pinker view the world is that they view their worldview can be boiled down to how much chicken do people eat, and that goodness is measured by how much more chicken the world is able to consume. So, if people in America are able to consume slightly less chicken, but people in Cambodia are able to consume more to a greater proportion, then that's progress, because they can eat more chicken now. And the point he was trying to make with that article, it was really good. He made a video of him reading it out, was that this kind of view of the world is just soulless. It's just lifeless to just view it entirely by the material. And that, what he had said, what the conclusion he came to is that if that was all there was to humanity, then it wouldn't be worth the 60 billion chickens that they eat every year. And that, you do need to have something else that people can strive towards. And then, not only that, but you have to remember that a lot of times materially we aren't really getting better. And because, I'm like, for example, I guess you could say I'm a millennial or Gen Zer. I'm 24. My generation is not nearly as wealthy as my parents' generation, and it's going to be very difficult to.
Yeah, they actually did a study on this, actually saying that I think the millennial generation and the Generation Z generation is going to be they proved that it would be less well off than their parents' generation. It's the first time, I think, in American history.
Oh yeah, and not only that, but I think they even said they'll have a shorter. They're expected to live have a shorter lifespan, which is incredible, considering how we've been told by all these liberal globalist politicians and thinkers for the last that we've been told for the last how long, 50, 60 years or so, that we're just progressing towards this great society, we're getting better, humanity's going forward, and when you listen to someone like Richard Dawkins or Steven Pinker, they have this view of the world that we just need to use science and reason and logic, and we'll just figure it all out. And then it's just not turning out that the way that they said it would. Another guy who really has looked bad, in my opinion, is Francis Fukuyama, because in 1992 he had said that we were at the end of history, that once the Cold War had ended and communism was destroyed, liberal democracy would spread itself across the world, and that everyone would become these wealthy Western people who were pacified by Nintendo 64 and the Backstreet Boys for all time, and that that's how global conflict was going to end, and that's how he said it was the end of history, because conflict was going to end. And it has not turned out that way. And honestly, I'm actually glad it hasn't turned out that way, because that's honestly a really depressing.
That is really depressing. I mean, just imagine like the worth of your civilization is like, oh, look how many Nintendo 64s we pumped out of these slave labor camps in China and that we imported here. Isn't that so great? And it's also what you were mentioning is like, at the end of the day, when you're at your deathbed, I mean, are you going to think about, oh, look at all these parties I had, look at all these drugs I took, I had so much just meaningless sex all day, and I mean, that's things will come and go, but this this moment, just living in the now, is just, we need to end that. And wait, one thing I oriented myself, I was kind of making my own party. It's a bit of a, I know it's kind of self-indulging, but I kind of, a purpose, the two things I put like as a, what was it? It's like a
Policy?
not like a principles.
Okay.
Two principles I had is future oriented and what was it, like past oriented as well, because you have to there was a good quote. It's like a people without a knowledge of their culture or heritage is like a tree without its roots. It will wither and die. And the future oriented is because if you just live, once you know where you came from, you know that the generation before you is handing you a baton to make the country great. It's not for you to just settle like, oh well, it's even, they ran so much, they ran a few miles, now they're giving it to me, and now I'm just gonna sit by and be idle because they made this country, they made it great. I'm just gonna sit around. No, it's now our purpose to, and then our purpose is to run and give our baton to the next generation, a nation they could recognize, a nation they could take pride in, and that's and when you're on your deathbed, when you're thinking about, at the end of the day, it's not going to be the amount of parties you went to, the amount of new drugs you took, or it's the people in your lives, the people, the family, the duties you've done, the works you've done, the things that give purpose and meaning, and it's this intentional. Just, it's not the amount of like, oh, I have 5 houses and I have so much money. It's there's more to it. There's a soul to it. And I'm not, this doesn't even have to be a religious thing. It's just, we have to recognize there's more to human endeavor than just sort of just the material. Like good, happiness and meaning and identity. Like people say, oh, that's just your biological, there's no biological purpose to that. Like where's the concrete example? It's like, well, sometimes you don't need that. It's on my 8 values test, it was like we need to question all our traditions. It's like, well, not really. Like, for example, Christmas, like, why should I question that? Like, oh, it's like, who cares? It's like, sometimes you just, and I think that's the thing with leftism, is that they want to question, they want to tear down everything from our past, either because it's outdated, or they think it's some sort of oppressive system or whatever. But I think to us, it's we kind of want to preserve what got us here, and we want to look forward to continuing this prosperity into the future.
Yeah, and one of my big problems with not only with leftism, but really with like liberalism in general, is that it can't really even conceptualize a lot of that. Kind of like you had said that no one at the end of their life thinks no one's last regret was that they didn't get the newest iPhone. A few examples you can use is that someone like, say, like if you want to use in the context of the United States, George Washington. He died in 1799, I believe. His vision when he was helping to create the country, his vision was not, let me just create. I want to create a country that I can live in for the last 20 years of my life. It was something that was supposed to live far beyond him. And I often say the same thing about the Fathers of Confederation here in Canada. Their vision was not that they would create a country that would just be a nice place for them to live for the last 20 years of their life. Their vision was that there would be a Anglo European country under the British Crown in North America for all time. That was their vision, and it was something that they believed they could pass on to their descendants, really. And I'll also add that just the things that you do value, that feeling of belonging that I get, in a small town in northern Ontario that I visit. And I really feel that, like, somewhere that I belong. There's people like me, and that my family has roots there. I'm not actually from there. I'm actually from Toronto, but when I visit a place that's a lot more Canadian, I do feel a lot more at home, and like that feeling of kind of security, that feeling of belonging. That's something that you can't really even justify through the liberal worldview, because it tells you that doesn't exist, and that really the policies that are being pursued is that needs to be sold off so that we can raise the GDP by 2%. That they're not, that we need to have replacement migration, that we need to pave over that because it's just not valuable according to the zeitgeist that's really leading us right now. And I think that is one of the big problems we have, is that people these days can't even conceptualize a lot of things that are abstract. They can't really even conceptualize the value of something like religion beyond the material. Like a lot of time, one mistake I think a lot of Christians make is that, and I don't know if you're religious or not. It doesn't really matter. But a lot of Christians, we make the mistake that we have to justify it through the amount of money that we give to charity, and what are the material things we do. And I mean, of course, those matter, but at the same time, you have to understand that like there's so much more to it, and it just goes way beyond that, and it's something people can't even justify these days.
Yeah, it's for me, for religion, a lot of people are trying to like justify, like, I'm not religious, but for what a lot of people are like, oh well, let me tell you about the scientific way how God exists. Like, that's not the purpose. The purpose of, at least in the Christian, because that's what I grew up in, is the faith. Having faith in a worldview, faith in in Jesus Christ. That's kind of the purpose of religion. It's not, you're not supposed to justify it through a scientific material thing. It's supposed to be a faith-based thing. It's and that's the purpose of it. You can't just like, well, let me tell you how scientifically, or this is why religion's good. And one thing also that in our right is that religion also matters. Like, I might not be personally a Christian, but what I call myself is like a cultural Christian, because what I understand is that Christianity is one of the fundamental underpinnings of Western civilization, and you need some sort of like a higher purpose and higher ideals that people could strive to. And Christianity does have that put that thing in place that makes people live better lives. And that's kind of what our purpose as right-wing people is trying to give social institutions, give people purpose and meaning. And one thing I think, and to piggyback off of what you were saying, is, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and I live in a sort of this it's like I think demographically it's like only like 50% white or something like that. But like the school I went to was obvious because the younger generations are more ethnically diverse, so it was like 40% white. And then I moved to New Mexico in Las Cruces, and it was like and then I was like a minority. I was like 80% Hispanic and then 20% white or something like that. So like I never really had like a place where I could just kind of, I felt like I was part of, like, where I could just see like something that I could grasp on, like a place where I could feel at home. And I think that's the thing, that's why people have this lost sense of meaning and identity, because they just don't have something to grasp onto. They don't have duties. They don't have sort of things higher than themselves. They just think of the here and now. What will get, let me just get high, and let me, it's kind of clouds they're thinking a lot. And one thing I wanted to move on to is also the kind of the problem of equality in the blank slate, and how humans are unequal, and how the hierarchies work. Because I think the fundamental underpinnings of what makes there was a guy named Nicholas Fuentes. He stars America First.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he was talking about I think in his recent his like recent live stream, he was talking about how they were talking about capitalism versus capitalism versus communism or whatever in the recent debate between Jordan Peterson and this Slovenian guy. And he kind of like, well, it's kind of we talk about like communism and hold up. What was I talking about? So it's kind of, but they both agreed on like, oh, equality is good. And because if you buy into that all humans are fundamentally equal, then the left wing has just all the you kind of, because I think that's what underpins the entire left wing worldview. Why are, for example, minorities overrepresented in criminal statistics? Oh, well, for example, because if everyone's born equal, if everyone's just born this blank slate, then the differences come from society. So the reason why, say, blacks in America, who are 30% of the population, make up, a vast disproportionate amount of the crime. It's like 50% of the murders. So I think one thing I saw was like 60% of robberies. But it was just like, it's just like there's differences in biology. For us, we understand because there's differences in biology. Why is it that, for example, Islam, there's a lot more Islamic terror attacks than, say, Buddhist terror attacks? Could it be that the ideology, there's fundamental underpinnings of ideology that cause them to, like, the reason why Islam spread is because it was a conquest ideology. You know, it was supposed to spread through conquest. That's why it spread so fast. And like that, the reason why Islam is the way it is because why there's so many terror attacks from Islam is because of, it's not because if everyone's just, if all religions are equal, then you would, well, the reason why there's one thing I think people agree is like, oh, it's because of American foreign policy or whatever. And but they, and for men and women, like men and women are fundamentally equal. What you know, I mean, like one thing I'd like to go, because that kind of just trashes this worldview, is that, you know, the reason why there's not a lot of women in, say, the infantry in like, say, in the military is not because we don't give them toy soldiers when they're growing up. It's because of fundamental, like, you know, it's because it's because of fundamental biological reasons, and we understand that's why we embrace it. Yes, there's different ethnic groups, and they all have a right to have their own countries. Yes, men and women are different, and we need to push policy that, and like that, men, you know, some things are women are better at, some things are men are better on, and they have to, like, they're kind of compatible with each other. That's kind of what nature made us, and you know, and everything else. So that's, I just want to, like, how do we combat this? Like, how do we combat this, like, blank slate ideology, just this equality dogma that we have?
Well, the easiest way is you just have to reject it, because that's one of the you know, there's just such an obsession with equality, and that's one of the most.
It's like after freedom. It's like freedom, equality. Like equality is like the second biggest thing for civilization. Like,
you know, I think of someone like, say, maybe Jordan Peterson, and I think it was the debate he had with what's his name, Dyson. Eric Michael Dyson, I believe it was. But basically, you know, in this debate, Dyson just went straight for the jugular and just went with slavery, colonialism, segregation, he just hammered him on all the you know, the talking points. He just went straight for it. And Peterson's only response was, "We're just individuals. We shouldn't say that." I mean, he had no response. And, you know, for the entire debate, it just looked like, you know, Dyson had him by the balls, because Peterson was fundamentally accepts his the first principle of the blank slate. He fundamentally accepts this first principle that, you know, that the differences are caused by the environment. It's caused by so-called institutions, and that we can get rid of these differences if we just have the correct institutions. And this is a big factor that is really causing a lot of problems for us, because, you know, all this policy is predicated on the idea of equality. Like all the affirmative action laws, which are ridiculous when you look into them. All this, like, foreign aid, all the, like, you know, the women in the military rules, and all this stuff. It's all based on egalitarianism. And it's something that, you know, there's a lot of scientific proof that it's incorrect. But not only is there scientific proof, it's just, you know, you can see it's incorrect just by going through your everyday life. Like, no one, no matter how egalitarian they are, no one in practice thinks that men and women are the same.
Yeah.
No one walks down the street and can't tell the difference between a man and a woman and acts the same, you know. And acts the same, you know.
An example I give is that, you know, it's the biology that makes the culture. It's not really the culture that makes the biology. In the way I explain is that, for example, if a woman slaps you, that's like, people see that as like, oh, like, we might say, okay, don't slap anyone. That we might agree to that, but it's fundamentally, people look at it fundamentally different if a woman slaps a man than if a man slaps a woman, because we understand that men are inherently more stronger, and there's a sort of more yeah, women are just fundamentally just, I guess, weaker. And, you know, we don't say they're inferior. We're just they're not supposed to be, you know, rough, you know, in terms of physicality. That's why we have a culture that when a man slaps someone, it's wrong. When a woman slaps someone, it's like, okay, well, it's not as bad. That's why it's like biology that underpins it. That's why we have that cultural norms for that.
Yeah, and how do you counter the narrative? I think you just have to. Well, first of all, when you engage with it, you have to be bold enough to actually question the entire concept of equality. Because the biggest problem with, you know, mainstream people on the right is that they're not bold enough to actually question that one. That, you know, like you had said, someone like Jordan Peterson fundamentally does believe in the blank slate, and that kind of makes his any ability he has to counter the left fall apart. Because all of like social justice politics is based on this idea that the reason for inequality is due to prejudice. It's due to or oppression, as they call it, rather than anything that's innate. And yeah, I'd say that first and foremost, the best way to you do have to be bold enough to actually question it. And secondly, another thing I often say is that one thing you can also say to people is, well, where did it come from? Like, what was this point in history that men got together and decided, oh, we're gonna oppress women by creating the patriarchy? And it's like, what was the point that this happened? Or what was this point in history that white people got together and said, okay, we're going to oppress all other people on earth by through white supremacy? I mean, that never happened. I mean, because even before they interacted with each other in 1200.
You're saying you're not getting your white privilege check? Okay, hold on. I need to like sign up with like the Ku Klux Klan for a second. I need to get them get on the email list quickly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even before there was any major interactions between Africa and Europe, there was still huge differences in outcomes, and clearly these civilizations developed very differently. Look, no one is suggesting that one human life is better than another, or just suggesting though is that they're different and that you can't just force them together and expect it all to work out. And what you certainly can't do is, basically we need a way of explaining this other than blame it on white people, really.
Yeah. And one thing that one example of this is, like, for example, the colonies of Africa and the colonies of, say, what happened. And if you see like the colonies of, say, let's say the British colony of Hong Kong, and then the British colony of India, and then the British colony of, say, like Sudan or whatever. If you look at, so they've all got their independence relatively quickly. So let's look at Hong Kong. It's like one of the richest city states in the entire world. It's like, just because it's a city state and it's like this one of the greatest, it managed to pull itself up and become a great nation. India, okay, it's not doing so well, but it's doing better and better, right? And then Sudan's just falling apart at the pieces. Now, they all have a history of colonialism, but why? I mean, it makes no sense on why, for example, like why, and we understand because it's the people that make these nations that are making the countries how they are. So it's they always try to blame some sort of person for and another example for this, and this is why, like, now a lot of people in the Democratic Party want to push for reparations and all that. And the thing with it is that what fundamentally underpins them is Asians in America. So Asians have historically also been discriminated against in America. Yet Asians have higher income per capita than whites in America. Asians have are not disproportionately in prison. They don't disproportionately they go to state, actually they're superior in terms of educational attainment. And in all, like, what type of white supremacy system is this? They're beating our ass and everything. And so it's just fun because, like, they were historically oppressed, yet they're doing so great. So it's fundamentally about it's not that they're kind of put this historical narrative that it's their fault. There's just, we could see like modern examples that it just fundamentally underpins that, there's like these oppressing, it was colonization or the legacy of slavery. Because like right now they could pull themselves up, especially with all the affirmative action government programs and all the tax breaks if you're a minority owned business or whatever. You have so much advantages, and yet they don't do it. Another thing for like feminism is like, for some reason, like apparently feminists think that women are oppressed when she has like a home, she could have a loving husband, kids. That's apparently an oppressive patriarchal structure. But but what we need to do is put women into like the workforce where they can make PowerPoints for $50,000 a year, and they're just this worker unit. That's real like liberation, apparently. So it's
the other example that I like to point out is that when they always talk about colonialism, like one thing you can point out is that in Africa, the least colonized country was Ethiopia, and it's one of the poorest countries in Africa. The only time it was even colonized, if you could even consider it that, was when it was under Italian occupation from 1935 to 1943. That was and they didn't even they didn't even colonize it in the same respect. But the most colonized country in Africa was South Africa, for obvious reasons, and it's the richest sub-Saharan African country. So even for like the Black Africans, so it's like, which one actually benefited more than the others? Or another example you can use is that Jamaica, which only became independent in 1962, is far richer than Haiti, which became independent in 1805. And then another example you could use is if they say, well, it's the legacy of colonialism. Well, what about like Ireland? What about the legacy of the Irish potato famine? Like that's not still causing the Irish people to live in Ireland's not like Haiti today. There isn't like a legacy of oppression there, or there isn't a legacy of Germans being oppressed because they were bombed in World War II. It's like it only goes one way. And then also, they'll never say like there's a legacy of Africans being oppressed in the Middle East.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because it's just not convenient for them, really.
And that's like one of the big taboos is like that colonialism. I mean, like I'm fundamentally on a principle level I'm against colonialism because I believe in the self-determination of ethnic groups. But if we're looking at a material basis, then they actually were a lot better off. They built like these huge infrastructure and they brought civilization to the countries they brought. And that doesn't make it right, but if you look at it materially, which is like apparently what our civilization is all about, then we would think it's it. And a lot of the thing with the left wing is that they're like, oh, we're for like a free Kurdistan and a free Palestine, and it's like these are fundamentally ethnic nationalist ideas, and they just don't see the hypocrisy. It's like, so if a Kurd wants a Kurdistan free from like the Arabs and the Turks, that's bold and that's normal. But if a British person wants England to not look like fucking Pakistan, it's apparently Sorry for that. And then one example of this is just like a little piggyback off what you said. It's like one thing they try to guilt trip us on in America is that, oh, you guys genocided all the American Indians. And the thing is that 90% of them died from smallpox, like not smallpox, just like disease. And they're like, oh, that's still your fault. And here's the thing, like no one's blaming the Asians for bringing the Black Death to Europe and killing 1/3 of all of Europe's population. Europe was decimated by the plague, yet they rose from the ashes. The American Indians did not. So it's like, it's just a little piggyback. And another dogma that to combat is this idea of democracy. Now, if I understand correctly, you're like in favor of like a monarchy, right?
Well, it's kind of difficult to say like what I'm in favor of. I would say that I like the idea of monarchy, but in theory more than in practice. I obviously know it's not realistically going to happen anytime soon. So I like to look at like the theory surrounding monarchy. I'd say that what's more important though is the critique of democracy. That's kind of what I've been focusing on a lot more.
Yeah.
Than an actually implementing monarchy, because I don't think that's going to happen. I'd like to focus on like really the with monarchy. I like to focus on like what does it mean? What surrounds it, and really how is it different than the vision of democracy that we have today? And I actually had this excellent stream on Academic Agents channel 2 weeks ago, I think. Or last week, that it was about monarchy and democracy, and Sargon of Akkad actually showed up, which was interesting.
Yeah, I actually just know about that. He's like a British like libertarian type guy, right?
Yeah, he has a huge channel. Like he has almost 1 million subscribers. But yeah, we had a interesting discussion, and my critiques of democracy are plenty. There's the critiques in theory, then also in practice. It's that for me, there's no skin in the game, and that the leaders that we elect don't have any that they have nothing really to lose. Their goal is to get elected, make themselves wealthy, and be in office for 4 years. And if they screw up, then results be damned. They don't have to deal with it. That's one of my biggest critiques of it. Then there's also the problem of them abusing the system, and that things like mass immigration is being used as a tool to elect left-wing politicians. They know that by flooding their countries, they're growing their voter base. And then lastly, I think an even more damning critique of democracy is that I don't know if it exists in any real sense, because the way that power is wielded in our society, it's not necessarily through the ballot box as much as people might think. That I don't think that democracy even grants us really self-rule in the sense that it's really sold to us. So does that make sense?
Yeah. It's more. That's kind of what I was. For me, that's the same thing for me. I was the first discussion I ever had on this channel like a week ago was this left-wing social democrat guy, and I was like, the last thing I was talking was like, what's your most controversial opinion? For me, I said, I said my second most controversial opinion. I said the fetishization of democracy, that everything has to be democratic. Like, let's put everything to a vote. It's like sometimes what we need is people who are more like, not everything has to be in like democracy. Like, as someone who was, for example, in boot camp for a little bit, I there was a hierarchy, and sometimes you just follow orders. And now for me, it's kind of, we have to have a mix. Like, not everything has to be democracy, but even if you live in like a monarchy, if you're a monarch or a totalitarian, even dictator or whatever, you always have to gouge the will of the people a little bit, because if you don't, then you eventually get like revolutions, and you have to always keep the populace kind of and it's a good way to understand, like, kind of see what they're feeling. But the thing is that not every, like, the quote, I know it's a used quote, but it was like, the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. It's just like, and the thing is that, we have, and, like, no one would, there's just certain things that, like, we just don't, like, even if, like, say a bunch of people would be opposed, let's say, because, like, the thing with democracy, at least now, is that so many people are so brainwashed, is that they might not, how do you say it? They'll vote against their own interests. And I guess there's just some things you can't just put to a vote. And I believe that if they came clear, like, hey, look, we're gonna have mass immigration. There was actually they did a poll with Edwin Powell, the guy who did the Rivers of Blood. Enoch Powell. Sorry about that. They did a poll with the British people, and I think it was like 75% agreed with his speech. So I have faith that the people are on our side, but it's just that, right now, if you're like, hey, let's bring in immigrants, the people are like, oh, well, what's so bad about that? So it's just that they kind of use democracy. It's like a self-hating, like, we don't ask soldiers what their opinion are, in following orders. We don't ask, the opinions of, like, just there's like natural, like,
yeah, like employees don't vote for their boss. Soldiers don't vote for their officers. Athletes don't vote for their coach. It's just considered like bad leadership, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to get to.
But no, the other point you brought up, though, is that, like, and this is kind of why I think that even as flawed as the system of democracy might sound in theory, it's that I don't think it exists in any real sense, is because power is wielded through many different organisms in our current system, most of which are not democratically elected. And the best example is mass immigration, in that even to this day, despite what, you'll see from the blue check marks on Twitter and the Guardian, CNN, CBC, all these things are so pro immigration, but normal polls of normal people show that they've always been against it. And the best example is Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech, where 75% of the British population agreed with his speech, and the policies for the next 50 years just went in the complete opposite direction. And then in the UK, it was under Tony Blair that they really just that mass immigration just skyrocketed. That was opposed by the population overwhelmingly. And the policies have just gone that way. And you can even point to someone like Trump, for example. Trump ran on a platform of reducing immigration. He ran on on that as one of the major points of his campaign. And under Trump, the policies have not changed. There has been, in fact, I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe there was actually even more immigration to the United States under Trump than there has been under Obama. And the reason for this is that I believe that there's powerful institutions that really just want it right now, and that it's kind of a matter of just voting for it.
Yeah, it's called, like, I think people call it, like, the deep state. Presidents come and go, but there's like this complicated government bureaucracy that's in place that kind of like Trump might. I mean, that's the conversation we have, at least in the American right, is like, is Trump actually caring about? Does he actually care about immigration? Is actually going to do something? Because he has. And does he want to end the wars? Does he want, or are there people in charge that are keeping him back? Is the military-industrial complex preventing him from implementing his America First foreign policy? Are there just people in place in the government, in the Justice Department, that are holding back, trying to implement like immigration restrictions? And for me, I think Trump has the right ideas. It's just there's so much. I guess he just doesn't have, I guess, the will, or just doesn't understand the full magnitude of the situation. Maybe he just deluded himself into thinking he actually is restricting immigration. I don't know, but I also had a discussion with the guy aforementioned about Tulsi Gabbard. She's a very anti-war left-wing person, and we were saying, like, if North Korea invaded South Korea, would she send troops to help them? And I said that, she might be against that, but it's because of this governmental deep state, as you could say, that just prevents. So it doesn't matter what person. It doesn't matter how strong-willed they are. There has to be a fundamental reshaping of the institutions in place, because it doesn't. Because think about it. We elected Donald Trump into the system, and yet this most revolutionary candidate couldn't get the fundamental changes needed. So it's gonna, I guess that's a black pill, or whatever. But it's just, Nicholas Fluentus made a tweet about this. He said, he's like, should probably disturb everyone that even with Donald Trump as the president of America, the status quo has still prevailed. It took all of 2 years to completely assimilate his explosive election and all its consequences back into business as usual. So I think that's, I guess, even if we do elect people, even if we have the will of the people, we still are thwarted by these undemocratic people who are there all the time.
Yeah, so, I didn't see the tweet because Nick Fuentes blocked me. But
oh, really? What?
Yeah, I don't know why he did, but anyway, but no, it is correct though that there is there's something that the reactionary author Mencius Moldbug refers to as the cathedral. And what that is the consensus. It's the civilizational consensus that kind of like that. So that the narrative that we were discussing earlier, it's that it's the consensus amongst the intelligentsia, this being the education system, the media, corporations, and so forth, that their opinion and their ability to apply pressure on positions of power and their ability to manipulate the population, that wields so much more power than electing a politician would. Because, I mean, when you think of it, you can't vote out the education system. You can't vote out these Marxist professors. You can't vote out CNN. You can't vote out all the heads of businesses who are lobbying the government to do one thing or the other. And yes, it might be a bit of a black pill, but at the same time, I don't have much faith. I don't have much faith in being able to change it to make much change through democracy for that reason. But people need to understand that one of the things with democracy is that it does not really exist in the way that you think it does. So it does not give the people the ability to decide the direction of their civilization, because there's all these other positions of power in place that they can't decide, and B, even if they do vote for it, then if people in power decide something different, then they'll take you in a different direction, just like we've seen with immigration, wars, all these different things that the populace has opposed.
Yeah.
but we've been taken in a different direction, though.
Yeah, and I think that's just a fundamental critique of democracy, is that, people think they're making their own right, their own unique and interesting perspective, and I'm actually changing the world with my vote. And that's especially the case if you're voting, like, if it was like Mitt Romney versus Barack Obama in 2012 or whatever. Like, you were just there's like, sometimes you get like a Donald Trump where he tries to push an agenda that's radical and it's going to change, but nothing actually happens. And the thing with, it's just like, you're actually getting the media has put you, like, a lot of people don't realize is that the media has changed how you thought. Your educational system has taught you what to think. People think they're like these critical free thinkers making these advanced unique choices, and yet the thing with democracy, at least the critique for save our civilization, is that it's kind of cut. We have these unelected these institutions in place that have been compromised, that are just pushing the narrative, and that's why we have a left-wing narrative, and that's why when people vote and they have all these narrative, from the media, from education, from everywhere, that they just they vote they think they're free, but they're actually not. They've actually been told what to think and what to vote for. And
like for example, I don't know. Do you know who the skeptic community were?
Yeah, I was part of it. I thought I considered myself part of it. Now I'm
one thing that always drove me crazy was that they called themselves free thinkers, like that they come up with their own view of the world, and that they're completely free because they don't listen to religion telling them what to do. But the vision for the world they come up with is they're liberals. They're living in a liberal democracy with a liberal constitution, with a progressive education, a liberal media, and then they come up with the idea that progressivism is good. Oh wow! What a free thinker you are!
Yeah, they think they stop believing in God, and they're like, oh, I'm now a critical thinker. I'm not into religion anymore. I actually question everything about everything, and it's just like.
And then they come to the exact conclusion that the education system gave them. And it's like they're not free thinkers; they're NPCs, because they're and I don't want to act like holier than thou, because in many ways a lot of my ideas are stolen from other people.
Everything we discuss, it's not really anything. The thing with me is that I understand, like, I'm not making these, like, I'm not this enlightened Buddha or whatever. I'm not like, let me entice you with all this knowledge. I'm just it's just, you look at the world and you have to just at the very least bypass what you've been told and just look at the problems that are fundamentally underpinning our society. And you can't just, some people are just like, oh yeah, liberalism is great, that's why there's a left-wing culture domination. That's why I brought you on, is to have this another narrative. You have to tell people to slowly get off it. And that's why I think the left-wing people, I think, caught on to this. You have to kind of, you could say, I'm going to use some language here, but to deconvert people from the left-wing ideology, you have to slowly do it. And what they call it is like I guess like the tube or something. It's like you start with like Sargon of Akkad, or someone who like says anti-social justice warrior stuff, but is fundamentally still like a left-wing person, right? Not Sargon of Akkad, but
Sargon of Akkad has come a long way. He is a right-winger now. Maybe someone like, say, like TJ Kirk.
TJ Kirk. Exactly. Like TJ Kirk, that's like where you would start, or just like someone like that. And someone who's left wing, you might be like a left wing, just social, like, oh yes, I want to help the black people, I want to do that. And then you just kind of, you're like, oh well, let me, and then you just kind of slowly, and then you go to Sargon of Akkad, these classical liberal types, and then you go into like maybe the from there, it's kind of like you have to you go into like kind of like right-wing populism, kind of like Paul Joseph Watson type stuff. You talk about mass immigration and all that, and then in Islam, and then after that you kind of have to go, and then you finally go into the alt-right, and I think the left-wing YouTubers have finally found that out, and they kind of, oh, that's radicalization. It's kind of more like so I think they realize it, but you have to slowly deconvert, and that's why we need to have this new narrative to give people, because right now they've been told what to think, and I think that's the greatest, I guess, the dystopian nature of our civilization, is that people think they're free, but really, they're not.
Yeah, I will add though that I don't think that like one of the major mistakes that I think that kind of the anti-SJWs were making is that what they said is that we shouldn't we should have one that's completely neutral, because a lot of them started off as atheists, that they were against religion being taught as a worldview. Then they're against social justice being taught. I don't think that it's a mistake to think that, you can just have a completely neutral one, that you can have it in a complete vacuum, a completely unbiased one. That's not going to happen. I think this is why, you need a new narrative. This is why I call it narrative. I didn't say it's the truth, because, fundamentally I am pushing a narrative. I am pushing an agenda. Yeah. Which, people could actually punch holes in. They could say, sure, and it's not entirely based off truth. I mean, I think I'm being truthful, but at the same time, I am biased. I am.
That's the thing about fundamental underpinnings of worldviews. I kind of was talking about that with the center left, with the left wing YouTuber, and I didn't want to push full on like demographics on him, because he's a social democrat, Bernie supporter and all that. So I didn't want to push full on, and I kind of. One thing I was kind of talking like, how can we talk if we have different values? And an example of this is if healthcare, for example, if you look at the statistics, at least for a national healthcare system in America, because we don't have that. And if you look at, because right now, I'm not going to go into the whole healthcare debate, but essentially, if you look at the numbers, it would be cheaper. It gives us a lot more better outcomes if we have some sort of universal healthcare system in America. However, if you're fundamentally, let's say you're just a libertarian anarchist or something, it doesn't matter if it's better. You just fundamentally have a political position that's antithetical to having a government healthcare system. So it doesn't matter. You can't convince them with facts and logic, because there's a fundamental political disagreement there. The same thing with immigration. And the thing with him is that he was saying, well, actually, immigrants don't commit so much crime, and the Mexican immigrants are actually hard workers, and they actually contribute to the GDP. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter if Sweden was importing Korean nanotechnologists or whatever. I'm fundamentally, I believe Sweden belongs to the Swedish people, and it doesn't matter if immigrants don't commit a disproportionate amount of crime. They don't disproportionately take welfare. They don't, they assimilate fully. They speak the language within a generation. They assimilate into the culture and everything. But fundamentally, the country belongs to that nation. So it doesn't matter how great you make immigration to be. You can't convince me. Well, I mean, unless my values change.
I mean, yeah, exactly. The one thing that you should point out, though, is that in the United States, they do kind of, when progressives say that immigrants don't commit more crime, the reason for that is because that in the native-born population, it does include the black population.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the crime. So yeah, they don't commit. But then even then, that kind of does just prove that why it's different. That why is it that immigrants commit more crime than a certain amount, but less crime than another amount? It's just. But the other point to point out, though, is that what I'll say is, when people say integration, it's what does that mean, really? So, I don't think what's going to happen is that, you're going to get, a Muslim Canada, or there is maybe some, it's more likely in some countries in Europe, but in terms of integrating into Western liberalism, that's actually probably possible. But that does not necessarily mean that they're not going to grow up hostile to you, because they might not maintain the tribal traditions of Africa. In fact, they probably won't, but they're still going to be taught about white privilege and stuff like that, and they're still going to be taught that you're a villain. And secondly, I just one more thing I want to say, though, is that in terms of integration, it's to me, just being a liberal and that doesn't equal integration. To be integrated would be to be completely indistinguishable from the rest of the population. And that would, if one of those small towns in Northern Ontario, if it was filled with people from a different country, but they didn't commit more crime, they didn't they were economically prosperous and so on, but would they still give me that sense of security, that sense of belonging in that town? And I think no. It's not even entirely about the crime. It's not entirely about the the economics, even though that of course matters.
Mm-hmm.
There's just goes so much more to integration. You know, you want to feel like you belong in your nation. You want to feel like you're at home. And if you replace your entire city with, you know, astrochemists from, is that even a thing? Is astrochemists? I mean chemists and nuclear physicists from I don't know, South Korea. I mean, it's still not the same, you know.
Yeah, exactly. There's more to a country than just like, oh, if it's, and the thing is, like, even then it's like it's just like, it'd be one thing if, like, you know, Europe was importing like these highly educated, highly cultured people, but we're importing like 75 IQ welfare leeches who commit a bunch of crimes. It's just like we're taking the worst of everything. But and one example you're pointing out is like the black population in America. You know, they've been here for hundreds of years, yet they still see themselves as like, yes, they might say themselves that they might call themselves American, but they might have an American identity, but they still have this external identity, like a black identity.
And that's all, I think is probably more powerful than their American one.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because there's no such thing as a and the thing is, a lot of people, what they're trying to, the thing with integration is that, you know, there's a basis, like for America and Canada, they both were based off, you know, the fundamental underpinning is Anglo-Saxon, like British, you know, British common law. That was like the basis of the civilization. And yes, America took in a bunch of French and Germans and Scandinavians originally, and yeah, we could assimilate them. But there was always a sort of underpinning of it was supposed to be there's an underpinning still. It wasn't this multiracial, multicultural country.
Oh yeah,
and we have a European identity. And a lot of people just try to like, oh, we just, you know, actually, no, anyone could be American. And, you know, there's just, it's not, the thing with being a citizen of a country, it's not just a paper. You know, we give out citizenship like candy. And it's just, you know, there's more to being when you think of, okay, as a thought experiment, when someone thinks, and I think leftists will admit this too, if you think of a Polish person, think of a Japanese person, think of a Turkish person, and think of a Somali. And like, we know how these people look like. We know there's an ethnic component to nationality. Now, one thing, I was talking to Polydice, and he, that was the left-wing guy. He's like, well, I won't accept that America is can't be a white country because, you know, we've always had blacks, and, you know, then we have Hispanics, and, you know, we've always had Asians, and it's, well, yeah, but we always are at least like an 80 or 90% white country, you know, and so, but now we're at like 60%, and so we're declining. And I'm just saying, I mean, we never were a multiracial country. Like, the first immigration law we passed in America was, we restricted to free white persons of good moral character. It's just, you know, we never were this multicultural country. This is a new experiment, and, you know, we're going to end up like the Austro-Hungarian Empire and just fall apart.
Yeah, because there was a very clear attempt in all the colonized countries and all the European extended ones. There was a very clear attempt to create maybe with the exception of South America, but there was a very clear attempt to create a European ethnic group within those countries. At least all the ones descended from the British Empire. You know, Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand all had European exclusive immigration policies up until the mid to late 1960s. And, you know, there was the policies were designed in order to create a nation state that would resemble one in Europe. And of course, you know, maybe you could argue they never got there because of the change in policy, but that was fundamentally part of it. And I think that, you know, what we need to do today is that at least acknowledge that, you know, that we have a nationality and a community of our own that extends beyond just simply American Canadian. Because the problem that we have is that like, you know, for example, there'd be Black Americans, there's Hispanic Americans, and on many times that would supersede the Black part, or the Hispanic part might supersede the American part. But then with whites, you're just American, and and everyone's part of that, and everyone's part of that group. It's the same problem in Canada. It's that everyone's Canadian, but we are only Canadian, and other people are something else plus Canadian. Like for me, for example, I'm of Scottish descent, but my family moved to Canada from Scotland about 130 years ago. So I can't really say that I'm Scottish.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if I just say I'm Canadian, well, is someone who moved here from India 5 years ago just as Canadian as I am? Am I the same as him? I'm not Indian. You could say he's Indian. I can't say I'm Indian. But so the point I'd like to make, though, is that like I think that there is something unique about the European diaspora in these various countries, and that I think you need to have some kind of a sense of that you're a community with interests, because this is what's being used to screw us in a lot of our countries, is that there isn't any way of pursuing group interests, and this is why they're able to pass all these policies that are really designed to screw you over. It's because you just don't have any way of expressing that as expressing that group politically, really, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I mean, so like for my father's side, it's like his side has been here in America since like the 1600s, in the terms with the British and German settlers, and my mom just recently immigrated. My dad met her in the Soviet Union, so my mom, that's why I could speak a little bit of Russian, but even then, like I just consider the thing with, even though like half my family is from another, just recently immigrated to America, like I still feel like it's kind of this, my father's side is like an American side, and my mom's side, even though when I consider myself like this, like pure, like I consider myself part of the dominant culture, you could say, part of the majority white culture. And I just, I feel like this is because I just see myself as like an American, and I think it's not like, oh, I'm a white Russian guy. Like even though my family is like a first gen, like, well, I'm second generation, but my mom's just first generation American. Even then, like I speak a little bit of Russian. My mom listens to Russian stuff and Russian music and all that. But like for me, I just fully how do you say it? Just even because it's because America is built upon a fundamental underpinning, which is Anglo-Saxon, Western, like mostly British common law, and that's kind of what I've been. I kind of identify as that, and even though there's like this other side of me that's still white a little bit, that's why I'm able to assimilate a lot better than say, well, like it's just kind of like, I'm not sure what I was trying to go. It's kind of like, even though I have like another side that just recently came from Europe, I still could assimilate well into because it was supposed to be for Western European, like just Europeans in general. That's kind of that was the majority group.
Yeah, and I think that for what someone might say is that that they might say, well, you're a recent immigrant to America, so there's no difference. And then, but like you said, the reason that you find it easy to assimilate with that is through a kind of ethnic solidarity. It is the one that you fundamentally identify with a lot more. And if anyone wonders why I speak a little bit of Russian, it's because in my the town I live, it's very massive, a lot of immigration to the town. There's very few white people left. The biggest European community there was Russians and Ukrainians, and I have a lot of friends that are from Russia and Ukraine, and I speak a little bit of the language, even though I'm actually Scottish and I've been in Canada for years and years and years. I mean, I guess you could say that that's another example of like, kind of it's something that I'm not necessarily part of, but I identify with more than I would, a non-European one. But the other thing that you can flip that on the leftists, if they say that, you're a recent immigrant to America, you can say as well, do I still have white privilege? Do I still have to pay reparations for slavery?
Exactly, yeah. And
it goes only one way. It's like, you're not American enough because you're a recent immigrant, but you're white enough that you have to pay reparations, and that you have white privilege and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's I'm an immigrant, but they kind of admit. It's kind of like the thing with the left is like they kind of know the things we talk about, but you just don't want to acknowledge it. Like as we were talking about the criminal statistics earlier, like there's some Muslim guys, like 70% of all inmates in France are Muslims, a clear example of Islamophobia in the criminal justice system. It's like, so they kind of understand, like, they just can't imagine that some people are just different and that there's people just they're fundamentally different, and they acknowledge that, like, well, you're a how you know you're so we acknowledge you as part of the dominant class, and that's why you need to pay reparations, but yet you're also an immigrant from a white country in Europe. So, where I mean, I'm not an immigrant, but my mom was.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's kind of like they can understand that the dominant culture is a white Western Europe, European one, or just a European one in general. So they kind of acknowledge that, but then they just kind of like don't want to acknowledge the implications of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the best. I mean, I think with the left is that they'll basically say they've come to their conclusion, and they'll basically say whatever they can to justify that. So I mean, that's why Americans, Canadians, they're European when we're in our countries, but then back in Europe, everyone can be European. So like, I don't know if you know who Laura Towler is, but she made a good video that I had pointed out to her on Twitter that she made a video about how people claim that they're English and that English is not an ethnicity, that they claim that it's that anyone can be one, and that if you just live there, you are. And I pointed out to her that in Canada, it's listed as an ethnicity on our census. So in Canada, it's an ethnic group, but Canadian is not an ethnic group. But in the United Kingdom, it's just a passport number. So it's like, they play this game that they'll basically say whatever they can to just justify their agenda. And
it's the left wing narrative that's in play that they've been told their entire lives, and that's what they're trying to justify. It's like, okay, well, it can't be that certain people are just different. That goes against the idea that people are fundamentally equal. So why is it that certain people are worse off? Oh, it's because of these structural institutions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They have to try to justify this left wing worldview. And I think the difference between, I mean, yes, we're pushing a narrative, but we are trying to put a different toward, like, try to answer the problems that this left wing narrative has brought about, and like bring about a new narrative that might explain reality a lot more. And I think it's like, hey, yes, humans are different. Men and women are different. Ethnic groups are different. Cultures are different. Nations are real. So it's that's the fundamental thing about the right and the left. And also, what I kind of want to know, like, what's kind of the future of the self-determination for these ethnic groups? Like, what's the future? Like, as we come, I'm assuming we're not going to regress back into more. Like, I feel like as technology has gone, I think this is just a curse of technology, is that we're just becoming more globalized. We're becoming more interconnected. As we mentioned before, that's to our, even though we are that, we're still losing our roots and purpose. But I think that's a trend that continues going on. How do we secure what's the future of, like, self-determination for how do we push, what do you see the future as, and like as at our current rate, and what do you think should be done to kind of make it to a more better future for the self-determination of the ethnic groups everywhere?
What is the future? It's difficult to say. I like to think that that there'll be an understanding that that people groups do have a value in their own, that that each of them has like a unique expression, and that it really is that unique expression that makes the world a beautiful place. I mean, why is it that all these various different countries on Earth develop so differently, and not even even ones that seem so similar? Like, why do the French have a very unique expression that's slightly different than that of the Germans? Why is it that in Canada we have that expression in French, and we also see it kind of in we see different expressions in Canada, in Anglo Canada and in French Canada. I like to hope that people will come to an understanding that people deserve a right to have self-determination, to have their own communities, their own education system where they can, maintain these stuff, teach them to the next generation, and that pretty much everyone deserves that. It kind of, and there's even precedent for this. There's things like the natives in Canada and America. There was policies designed to not only maintain a geographic location for them, but to maintain their cultures, to maintain their ability to have self-determination. That's and there's a lot of policies directed towards that, but it's only that the same policies are denied to other groups of people. And I think my goal would be to have a recognition of that and to have policies in place similar to that. I mean, I think it's a mistake to think that it's a mistake to lament what's been lost, because we can't undo what's already been done. So I think that it's the best,
especially in America and Canada. I think we sometimes overestimate what's happening in Europe, but like Europe is still like 90% white. We're like declining to like 60%. And the thing with I think a good white pill for this is your video on the Hungarians, how they were subjugated under Austrian rule for hundreds of years, and they had policies in place to try to forcibly just destroy their their purpose and identity. And I think but yet despite all that, they persevered, and now they have their own nation. And I think it's a bit of a for at least for the European countries, I think in America, if we balkanize, yes, there'll be a place for white Americans or whatever. But I think for Europe, I don't want to see like ethnic enclave, like a piece of France is like for French, and then like a lot of it, like the southern France is like for sub-Saharan Africans. I think for us, a goal, at least for European nationalists, is that they need to push out all the invaders from the land. It happens in every single piece in history. It's when India and Pakistan broke apart, they exchanged the Muslims and the Hindus. When the Turks and the Greeks broke apart, they expelled the Turks and the Greeks back to their own places.
Same with Hungary. Yeah,
in Hungary too. And I think if I want to be more optimistic on the future of humanity, is I think it might actually be a bit decentralized. I think a lot of people tend to think we're going to move toward a one world government and a one world like currency and a one world religion. I think as technology will allow us to be more decentralized and a lot more autonomous into these mini groups, then there'll be like a decentralized currency, little city state nations for groups of people. And I kind of think I hope that's kind of the future. I think one thing that in my past, like for example, when I was like kind of a proto-communist, you could say this, like as I mentioned before, I always imagined myself. I think it's just an expression of my past. I always thought like, I'm going to live in like a commune with people like me who I could have like an identity with, and I'll work toward a common goal. And I think even when I was like some sort of like the most left wing I ever was in my life, I had still that drive to try to, like, I still wanted some sort of identity or purpose, and I wanted to have higher goals and ideals. And so I think everyone faces that. I think you mentioned that like a lot of your left-wing friends also kind of like they want to go to like all these cities in Europe, and they kind of steal my culture.
Like, even this week, there's this one left-wing person I have on my Facebook account, and this guy is considerably left-wing. I mean, he's not like a Marxist, but he's I guess he'd be like a strong like social democrat, like Bernie supporter, stuff like that. He made this big post on Facebook about how tragic it was that Notre Dame burnt down, and I just thought like, there is still a longing inside of this guy for some sense of like, he still does have an appreciation for European civilization, even though, ideologically he might be opposed to it. He still understands, like, when he sees something as beautiful as the Cathedral of Notre Dame burned down, that there's a big loss there. And, I find a lot of people on the left wouldn't actually follow that ideology to its logical conclusion. They can say on Twitter that, they don't care about their demographic decline. They don't care about, this or that, we deserve it for centuries of oppression and stuff like that. But very few actually believe that, I find. Like, I think Millennial Woes pointed out the idea that every liberal loves Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is like this hierarchical, traditional world. Really, it's one that is in many ways you could consider, though, I mean, the messaging in Harry Potter is not reactionary, but the environment you could say it does harken back to something a lot more traditional. And there is a longing inside people for that. And I have to think that if people are even given the chance, a lot of people, I think, would be interested in it, because they're not given the chance these days.
Yeah, it's that's one thing that we need to push in. I think in the a lot of the I'm stumbling on my words. Sorry. The video for the channel for Blackpilled. You know how he reviews like kind of old school movies. I feel like what we need is also kind of like it's not like you're not going to push in. You have to slowly put like traditional values into your like having stable families, happy families, a man and a woman, having strong kids, healthy kids with you have to have these like values in place. These that people it's not very explicit. It's implicit. It people kind of have to kind of say, oh, that's a good thing. And I think I was when I was talking to the social democrat guy like a week ago, I kind of I was trying to say, well, what's your view on like as America becomes more multicultural and multiracial, like what's your view on like I'm like, and I didn't want to go full alt-right on him because I wanted to go kind of slow. I was like, okay, well, I think that I have a concern that these ethnic groups are going to like tear this country, like tear this country apart, and how like they kind of have these irreconcilable differences, and they kind of how do we unite as Americans as all these ethnic groups? And he's like, well, I just think they're coming here in good faith, and they want to come here and make their lives better, and they also want to they are coming here for good reasons, and I told him like, well, humans are naturally just tribalistic, right? And he's like, well, yes, but that's just kind of like primitive of humans. We could actually move past that. So I think that's just the fundamental underpinnings is that he believes we could, if we just put pressures in place, we could defeat racism and sexism and everything with just the right institutions in place. And then we'll have this, we could work together in kumbaya. But for me, I guess my thing is like, well, no, we can't. We'll always be tribal. And I think, like we understand, in sports or in hell, even in politics, it's like they can like we're fighting against the right wing Nazis. Like you're putting an out group and in group. It's so fundamental on like what we are as human beings. It's just that they understand that there's groups. They just can't understand that something as fundamental as like just like culture and race is real. Хорошо.
Я завтра это как потом подогрею эти.
Да. Спасибо.
С мясом там.
Спасибо.
Попозже.
Да.
Well, one thing I'll point out is that like I think that if there was a more of an understanding of kind of this like mutual respect that like I respect what you have and you respect what I have, and we and that it wasn't as like you weren't really like forcing people together as much. You weren't like forcing them all into this blank slate kind of mentality where you just want to make everyone the same. I think that you could make those differences a lot less damaging. Like an example would be that up in Ontario, like in a lot of these towns, there is native reserves, and there's all these old towns that are about 95% white or something, and it's like I feel at home in one of those. I'd feel at home when I visit one of those towns, but at the same time, I don't want. That doesn't mean I don't want the natives to have their own reserves, like But the reason that I think it works is because they had their little land and we had our own, and if we don't infringe upon each other, then it's not as big of a problem. But the problem is that that's not what's happening. It's like we can't have our own communities. We can't maintain. We can't decide who can come in, who can come out.
Oh yeah, exactly. It's also
not the same.
And one thing, it's what they're saying is, well, if you push them a little bit, they're like, okay, well, the future is that we're all going to become one race, this brown race or whatever. But it's like, no, that's not true. We're gonna, in 2100, 100 years from now, when we're both dead and gone, is Nigeria going to look like Japan, or is it going to look like Peru? No, it's but in 2100, is Britain going to look British? No. Is American Canada look as it is now, or it was a few decades ago? No, hell no. It's not. Is Western Europe going to look how it is? No, definitely not. So it's only happening in one way, and it's not like it's only white countries, European countries, that are feeling this brunt of multiculturalism, not anyone else.
The other thing I often say though too well, I say this to leftists, but specifically white leftists. What I'll say is, okay, if you believe in this grievance culture, if you believe like, in white privilege and stuff like that, I will always ask them is, what are you personally willing to give up? Are you personally going to give up, parts of your salary? Are you going to personally give up, potentially your safety, or like what are you going to put on the line? Like, I don't want to hear this that you're going to you're going to acknowledge your privilege and do this. No, I want to know, like, what I want to know is, what are they going to give up personally? How are they going to make themselves worse in order to compensate for this alleged grievance? And in reality, none of them actually would. And I don't see any of them actually doing that. And that's one of the things that I think it was Millennial, what was that, said this also, is that he thinks that the support for multiculturalism is probably a mile wide but an inch deep. That it's they'll talk about it all the time. They'll talk about how great it is. And any Guardian reader, any blue check mark, whoever, they'll shout about how much they support it, but at the same time, how much are they putting into it, and how much are they willing to sacrifice for it? And I don't think very much at all. And that's one thing that's something that I think could flip very quickly.
I think, yeah, you're 100% correct. For what we were mentioning earlier is that, I think you brought it up, but it was like, like progressivism only could exist in like these highly wealthy, highly educated societies. And I think, like upper middle class white liberals, I think they're just so naive. Like, it just frustrates me they have such a not an optimistic, just like very diluted. I don't know what the word for it is, but just like they live in like, in these, like, as you said, like these like white gated communities, and they just, are they willing to live in like, in the inner cities? Are they willing to live in these multicultural bastions? And I think, I don't know if they will. I'm pretty sure they don't. It's like, oh, do you want? If it's so diverse, why don't you move to, like some other, if you want to feel like a minority, why don't you move to somewhere? Because if you ask, like, when Donald Trump got elected, a lot of like Hollywood elites were like, I'm going to move to Canada, or I'm going to move to.
None of them did.
Yeah, and none of them did. And then also what? Why not move to, I don't know, to like, El Salvador? Why not? Canada's more white than America. Any country is more white. Well, any European country is more white than America. Why aren't you moving there? And it's like, oh, well, it's kind of feel like they kind of understand that they kind of want to, I don't know, they're not moving to where they want to be. But sometimes I actually legitimately think they actually believe in multiculturalism. Like, oh, look at all this nice food and look at all this nice music or whatever. Right? Maybe they do believe in it. I'm not sure.
And the other thing to point out, though, is that I do think there is a fundamental difference between the upper class white liberal and then the younger, like maybe leftist millennials. Because I think that, like, the upper class, middle-aged liberals, for them, like, progressivism is fashionable. It's their way of, essentially virtue signaling. It's the way of them showing that they're a modern, virtuous person by, talking about refugees and stuff. And with them, as we mentioned, that they lose nothing. But then when you look at the younger ones, so the SJWs on the college campuses, the Marxists, these ones, and I made a video about one of these guys in my family. Like, they're absolutely miserable. Like, my experience with them is that they absolutely hate their lives, and like they're depressed, they're bitter, and really, because the reason is they're just given this the identity that they've embraced is just one that's anti themselves. And I really think that that's something that can't last, because well, first of all, the reason they believe that is because that's all they've been given. That's what they've been taught, and that's what they've embraced. But with them, like, they're really feeling the pain with that one, both psychologically, and secondly, they're obviously not going to become these upper class. They're not going to, get a house in the suburb. They can't afford it. So with them, I think there is a lot of potential, because, this next generation, like, there's the stereotype of like the millennial SJW with purple hair,
and glasses and stuff. Like, at least for the white ones, like that's going to be very difficult for them to stay in that political persuasion for very long. And that's something that does give me hope. I do think that a lot of them, if they were just given an alternative, would jump for it.
Yeah, and I think also for other minority groups, that at least in America, they're actually, if you poll them, it's white. They did a poll recently, like, about white liberals, black liberals, and Hispanic liberals. White liberals were the most group that was most opposed to Trump's wall. It was like 85%, and then like Hispanic and black liberals were like only like maybe like 60 or 70% opposed to it or something like that. But it's like if you pull just not, I think what people realize is that, you know, conservative views, like, obviously we're both white, so we kind of have our own ethnic interests in mind, but like, you know, our fundamental understanding of, you know, reactionary or conservative ideology is that, I think that's actually something that blacks, Asians, and Hispanics are actually more attuned to. I hate to sound like a boomer here, but like, you know, it's also like something for minority. Like, it's our ideology is something that I think everyone could like respect, like, hey, family, country, and, you know, God, and, you know, just like kind of, you know, these fundamentals, because I think they're more conservative, and I think it's mostly like white liberals who are the most bought into this, and it's kind of.
But you also have to remember, though, that there is there are fundamentally different interests at play here. So one person actually put it quite well to me. What he said was that he said that a lot of minorities being left wing is the equivalent of a white person being right wing. So it's their way of pursuing, I guess, ethnic interest, you could say. So it's a mistake to think like that. It's a mistake to think that, like, you know, Black Americans are going to support the right because they have, like, you know, they're nationalistic or something like that.
Yeah. Well, kind of more like conservative. So, like, I was just kind of saying that they're more like, especially like, they're more like, you know, like Hispanics are more religious, like they're Catholic and they're more family oriented. Asians as well, not Catholics per se for Asians, but like, you know, they have more conservative social mores in place than white Americans. That's actually why, for example, you know, why we need to return back, because if you look at the suicide and drug overdose rate, it's especially hitting white Americans. It's not hitting so much for example, Hispanics. And a lot of people are like, well, why is that? That's so weird. And you know, I was on Reddit, you know, where, you know, that's kind of where you might think all the liberals are at. They're like, well, and a guy who's like, well, because they have all these family structures and the communal support. It's like you're advocating like our worldview. It's just that they can't. I don't know. If they feel like if the government just throws money at it, it will solve the problem. But there has to be a deeper, in-depth purpose to it.
Yeah, I think that definitely one of the problems is that white progressivism is a very white phenomenon. Like the radical Black activist has very different motivations going on inside their head than the white progressive. Like, you know, for the you know, for the Afrocentric you know, Black Lives Matter, whatever, you know the type. For them, it's about ethnic interest for them.
Yeah, and it's not even radical Black activists, just regular Black activists for the Democratic Party. They always ask, like, okay, how is this going to help my group? What's your agenda for Black Americans? Like, there's what's your agenda for they're interviewing this guy, Andrew Yang, the same guy, and the guy was like, okay, I want to give $1,000 to every American, and the guy's like, okay, well, what about $1,500 for Black Americans in the spirit of reparations? It's like, and you know, the guy, a person said, you know, people are voting based on, I'm voting as a former slave, like they still see themselves as like, you know, they still see themselves as like, you know, I'm an oppressed person, even though my great, you know, grandfather was a slave or something like that. They still see themselves as like oppressed, and they're like, we still see themselves as this ethnic group. And they might say, okay, yes, I'm part of this American experiment, maybe. But even then, it's like, well, what are you going to do for our community? And yes, and they might agree, like, okay, yes, I hope everyone else is fine, but what are you going to do for us, the Blacks? And, you know, it goes on for Asians and Hispanics as well. But it's like there's nothing there for whites.
Yeah, exactly. It's and I think that one thing that is kind of sad is that with I don't know. I mean, I don't know what you think of a Yang Gang, but like it does. To me, it seems like he's the least terrible Democrat. I mean, he seems like a nice guy. I don't know.
It's kind of the gang kind of came about as from what my research is kind of like it's kind of like actually like a mini black pill because it's like, okay, well, America's going to fall apart. You know, it's eventually going to happen. We might as well get $1,000. You know, when because that's his signature proposal. You know, we might as well get that. You know, and as America falls apart, you know, we elected Donald Trump, this right wing populist guy, and he can't do anything. In fact, immigration's worse. Our trade deficits are worse. Our healthcare system is still in shambles. But you know, the environment's still going on. But you know, whatever. So we elected him. That didn't happen. Okay, well, America's going to break apart. We might as well get and it's called like, you know, you have to just keep your focus on the bag. It's kind of like the meme about it. It's kind of like it doesn't matter if because like Andrew Yang's just a typical Democrat. You know, like, he supports all these democratic positions, albeit more wonky and actually a lot more. I kind of like it when it's more wonky and all that because actually it's kind of more fun that way. But it's instead of like, oh, we're doing this because it's for fairness and equality. But it's kind of like, okay, well, he's going to give us $1,000. He says he wants to crack down on the social media sites that are like, deplatforming everyone, kind of like treat them as public utility. So it's kind of like,
the other thing with him was that it was just one tweet that he made one tweet that white people were dying of opioids. And like the thing I guess you could say it's a black pill, but like, Trump in his State of the Union speech never once mentioned the white demographic who elected him. And then like
he brought up the Holocaust for some reason.
But then, Yang makes one tweet and that's like the highlight of people actually caring about your problems. I mean, that it does go to show like, the real position that I guess that we're in. But yeah,
they think he's like some sort of like crypto white nationalist now because he's like in his book he's like some Asian guy who immigrated from Taiwan is like a white nationalist. Yeah, but he's like, yeah, these white people, they're disproportionately being affected by the manufacturing, in automation and the trucking automation and the all these automation is mostly hitting whites. And he's like, and obviously he's still left wing, so he's not like it's time for white people to band together. But he's like, I'm worried that they'll join these white identitarian groups, and there'll be these huge conflicts. And as long as we try to make this transition to in our automated economy, we could actually live as long as we give everyone a fair shake. Everyone could work together. So I guess that's where we could kind of like disagree with him. But just because he mentioned that like white people might band together or has problems of their own, he's now like some sort of crypto white nationalist or whatever.
Yeah, but it's just depressing that like that it's just that one tweet that he gave out, or maybe it was more than one, but like just that one thing that's like the most any politician has given a shit about white people.
Yeah.
and, ever since Trump tweeted about South Africa. But no, I mean, I think that well, yeah, I think that it's kind of just a testament to why democracy is not going to win it for us, and that but yeah, I think it is going to be through something like through meta politics. It's going to be through people really changing the way that they're living. It's going to be through, isn't going to be like one person elected that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's going to be through, I mean, I hate to be, cringe here, but it's going to be through like the memes and everything. Because like nowadays, like even, who Secular Talk is? He has like 600,000 subscribers.
Yeah, I know who he is.
He's like a left-wing social democrat, but even then he kind of buys into like the anti-social justice where he's like, oh, you're triggered. So you could shift what you call the Overton window, the debate of respectable discussion in mainstream opinion. That's a mouthful, but it's kind of we have to shift that to the right, at least in the terms of like race and culture and Islam and everything. And it's the more people it makes us see people who like advocate for like white interests seem less radical than they actually are. So it's just even if it's not mainstream to say that, hey, white people deserve homelands and they have a unique history and heritage and everything. at least with the Overton window shifting, right, they might, okay, we want to preserve this nation and we want to have assimilation and restricting immigration, but it makes us seem less radical, and that's why it's important to shift this Overton window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. The Overton window is not there yet, and that's kind of, I mean, it goes to show, like with Trump and with the Yang tweet, the Overton window isn't in the position that you can actually even suggest that white people have interests.
Yeah.
But I do think it is. I do think it is going in that direction. I think, and the best person that's shifting the Overton window right now, I think, is Tucker Carlson.
Oh yeah, no, he's one of the greatest. And another thing about you brought up South Africa. That's actually just a stabbing against conservatism. It's and not conservatism as of ideology, just mainstream conservatism, at least in the Western Anglo world. It's just like, the Constitution will save us. No, it won't. The Constitution in South Africa was changed so they could confiscate white land without payments. The Constitution isn't going to save you. Yeah. And that I guess that's just the nature of the beast. And that's why, for example, that's why it's fundamentally people need to have an understanding of kind of. That's why I guess that's another thing. It's the liberal democracy order. Like, yeah,
exactly. South Africa is a liberal democracy.
Yeah, but yet it's like 80 or 90% black, and the white populations now, like, they still treat them as like colonizers, even though most of the white people have been there longer than a lot of the black people have, because most of the blacks actually who moved to South Africa came from more northern, like more north than South Africa.
Yeah, the Bantus are not indigenous.
Yeah, so it's like, some white people are more indigenous to South Africa than even most of the blacks are, yet they still see themselves as like some sort of colonizers. It's just, so it's kind of like democracy is just a racial headcount. And, once the whites do become a minority, they're going to like, they already talking, like they were talking about reparations in the Democratic Party already. Now, I don't think they're going to run on reparations, but they're already bringing it out. And
it's entering the dialogue, and I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a realistic thing.
And they want to silence you, they want to disarm you, and then they want to confiscate your wealth and property. That's kind of that's what they fundamentally want. They see themselves as like they see the white people of America as the dominant, the people who have been oppressors, and they want to shut down and disarm them, and then confiscate their what they call unjust, like what they would consider unjust kind of like holdings, and then distribute it to their voting populations. And that's another disappointment of democracy, is that they're doing it. The reason why they're pushing reparations, at least in the Democratic primary, is because blacks make up a giant proportion of the Democratic primary, and they want to entice black voters to vote for them. Now, obviously, reparations are completely disliked in all of America, but so they might not run on the general election. But the fact that they're already, again, that's another failing of democracy, and another failing of just kind of that we're all kind of moving toward this egalitarian future where everyone just kind of sees themselves as human.
Yeah, I had a good discussion last year with a guy he was from South Africa. His father was actually from Rhodesia. In fact, I actually had several guys on my channel from South Africa. But one really interesting one was I had a conversation with a guy whose father fled Rhodesia. And he eventually fled South Africa, and just this story of how like his world that he grew up in really just changed overnight. That he grew up in this because he lived in the later years of apartheid, and he grew up in like what he had said was just this fantastic community where he just had all the freedom he would like in the world, and that the biggest concern you had was like the bully at school, and then it became that you can't even your sister, your girlfriend, your mother can't even walk outside alone without being attacked. And it's just like it really is just terrifying when you think of like what direction are we going in. I know that's an extreme example, but the idea that that this sense of security that we have now is going to last forever, I don't think is going to be the case. Now, I'm not saying that. I don't think within the next, probably not within my lifetime. I don't think it'll be like South Africa, but at the same time, it could end up like something like Brazil, that maybe it's not like people are out in the street trying to kill you, but at the same time, like, the services get worse, the crime goes up, the social cohesion goes down, the corruption goes up,
Oh yeah, exactly. That's the future of America and Canada and basically most of the Western world. If we don't, I mean, Brazil is a good example of that, and it's kind of on one thing they say, like, it's so weird. They say like white genocide, like they say the idea that white people are getting replaced is like some sort of conspiracy theory, and then at the same breath they're like, okay, look, we are becoming minority, like majority minority, and you have to understand that yes, white people, it's hard to give up your power, but it's it's time it's something you have to do. It's like, well, it's like one thing, it's some sort of like white supremacist conspiracy theory. What is the U.S. Census Bureau a white supremacist organization?
Yeah. Oh yeah. They move the goalposts with that one all the time. Like they'll first of all say, like, for example, one thing I often say is that in Europe they're saying that it's a conspiracy theory. In Canada they're saying, okay, the replacement's real, but it doesn't matter because we're all the same and diversity is our strength. In America, they're saying it is real and it'll be bad for you, but you're white and you're horrible and you deserve it. So, I mean, it's like anyone. I don't think that it's working when they're them saying that it's a conspiracy theory, because in America, they just cannot say it's a conspiracy theory anymore. They have to justify it now. And I think that this is why kind of the anti-white rhetoric is ramping up, because you can't tell these people that it's a good thing for them. You basically now just have to tell them that it's punishment for them, really.
Yeah, and it's for because like I think they understand that if you tell, because they actually do studies on this, if you tell just regular white people that you're getting replaced by, like, what do you think of the future in a minority America, they instantly become more conservative than they actually really are. They might consider themselves liberals or whatever, or they just consider themselves centrists or whatever, but they become more right wing. And again, that's kind of what made me change my mind. I mean, I was a Bernie Sanders social democrat. What changed my mind was, obviously the hook was Trump's populism, at least economically, but what got me in was just like seeing what's happening in Europe with mass immigration and what got me, I think, was the German government covering up the Cologne sex attacks. And I'm like, oh, well, what? And then, like, I understand what happened in England and what's happening in France. And there's a good meme. It was like kind of like how this contradictory left-wing worldview is. So it's like, whites are oppressors, non-whites are victims, but race doesn't exist. Yet I love racial diversity and I celebrate our differences because we're all the same. So let's destroy diversity by mixing together, but only in white countries.
Yeah, I like that meme. Yeah, I will make a recommendation that probably one of my favorite videos ever on YouTube was the video that Millennial Woes made about one of the Rotherham videos he made about it was titled "The Rotten Pillars," and basically the point he was going to make an entire series of videos, but he never finished them, which was unfortunate. But the point he was trying to make, though, was that if you look at it, it was focused on the Rotherham scandal in the United Kingdom, and when you look at things like the Rotherham scandal or the Cologne sex attacks, and not only that these happened, but that they happened to the dominant population, and that the government essentially either covered up or colluded with the rapists in many ways. Yeah. It really paints a dark picture for the future of European civilization if things don't change, because you have to understand that not only is this a problem that you're going to have, but it's one that the governments don't seem interested in solving for you, and in many ways are imposing it upon you. So yeah, I mean, when you make that connection, when that thing like links in your mind, when you kind of get that light bulb going off, it's a big change for a lot of people, and it's something that's hard to digest. It's sure. I mean, I don't call myself black-pilled, but I was more a couple months ago. You do kind of get over that because you kind of go through the anger phase, but yeah, that is a big like jump you have to make. That like, look, if you don't change something, if things don't change, we could be in trouble in the future, and we don't want that. it's a big step for a lot of people to make.
Yeah, and that's another thing. A lot of people are like, "Oh, we are living in a racist criminal justice system," and yet, there's these, we have and think about like the worst thing that they were saying that was going to happen. Like when we opened our borders in the 1960s, like what were they saying? They weren't even saying that we were getting get replaced. We were just like, okay, look, these, we're not going to have like, we're not going to ban you if you're, you're black or Hispanic or whatever, but we're just going to maintain the ethnic composition of America or whatever. That's what they're doing when they passed the Hart-Celler Act in 1965, or in the 1960s. I think it was 1965. But
yes, it was.
And they they were saying all these things, and I mean, when Enoch Powell was making his, I hope I said that right, but yes. When he was making his Rivers of Blood speech, he was saying, I mean, think about like the worst case scenario. Like if say just this white supremacist, anti-immigrant bigot was like talking about bad things, like, oh, these people are going to come in, they're going to change, they're going to Islamify everything. Mosques are going to be erupted in every single place in our city streets. There's going to be a Muslim mayor of London. There's going to be these Muslim grooming gangs raping our kids and everything, and there's going to be these terrorist attacks every few months that kills dozens of us. And there's going to be this massive surveillance state. There's going to be hate speech laws, and they're going to replace the British population. I mean, did they even? No one thought that was going to happen, because that's so absurd. Like it was not so. Not even. I don't even think people who were pushing for that thought it was going to get that worse. I think it's just it got so worse than it was originally people thought was going to happen, and yet everything came true, even worse than what people were going to say. Like,
oh yeah. And Douglas Murray made that point.
And it might be worse than and maybe this is just black pill too, but it's like we might think, okay, maybe the future is kind of like Brazil, where white people aren't like actively hunted down. We just kind of exist as this like this dispossessed minority, and just kind of we kind of live in this nation we don't recognize. But it doesn't. It's nothing. People, they will all assimilate. America will just kind of become this like multiracial country that just kind of doesn't really have social cohesion, and there's a lot of crime or whatever. But like, I mean, maybe it might even be worse. Maybe there is I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe it does become worse. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that is true, that it could be possibly worse than even I might think. I mean, I try to avoid like the too much doom mongering. I try to avoid there's going to be a race war and we're all going to kill. I don't like to do that, because for many reasons. We don't have to go into those here, but that is true, that you have to, when you look back at it, the populace did not know what was coming up. And Douglas Murray had actually made a good point, that what he said was that when Enoch Powell made his speech, he had talked about a street that an old woman was the only white person living left on the street in wherever his constituency was. I can't remember, but Douglas Murray has said that back then journalists had pointed out that no such street existed in England, and then today, London is less than half of London is white British, and he said that no, even the doom mongers in the 1960s, even the Enoch Powell's, even the people who were ringing the alarm bells, they had understated it. So it is definitely something that people need to understand, is that and I don't like to push the we're all going to get killed. But, the message I like to push is that we're losing out big time, and that it's not something, and we don't want to wait to find out what's going to happen.
You have to kind of wake up. I mean, the thing with people is that it's kind of a mix of a white pill and a black pill. You have to give both. The thing with it is that you have to understand, look, whites will become a minority. Look what's happening in South Africa. Look how Brazil looks like. Look at all these, yes, there's these bad things that happen. And I think most people are like, oh, well, I think people just don't recognize that, and they don't really have some sort of national identity or ethnic identity at all. And and you have to kind of okay, look, things are going to be shitty, and it's going to be a lot worse before it gets better. However, look, if we band together, if we create a homeland and reawaken reawaken with our heritage and get an appreciation of our past, and look forward to a brighter future. We can make a better, America, or a better Canada, or just a better home, a place where our descendants could live in countries that they could recognize, where our descendants look like us, where our future countries are still, where our European countries are still the most maybe this is my Eurocentric worldview or whatever, but it's the best, it's the best, the places in the world to live in. And I think people understand that's even the understand it, because I was traveling in California and San Diego, and I was staying in like a lot of people on a lot of these people's houses, and they were saying like it was like a what and they're all of them are very left wing, like very just like like these new age spiritual people, usually like a lot of like hippie weed smokers and all that. But even they were like, I was traveling to Norway, and I was, it's very safe and very nice, and it's very like I think if you told them, and I think I don't want to I think I told them like where I'm like, I think they said they would rather live in like I think I brought it up actually. It was like I would rather live in a small town in Norway than in like Honduras or Ethiopia or whatever. It's just there's different. I think people have a longing toward like that. So on that note, it's just like I love how that's kind of what we're fighting for, is that restructuring this dominant left wing narrative and focusing on making a new narrative that pushes healthy, like, hey, we recognize human nature, we recognize the differences, and we recognize that people have a right to have their own identity, their own purpose in life, and we're pushing for higher ideals and higher duties, and we're trying to make human beings to become better than their natural state, which is a kind of this fallen, kind of animalistic sort of, and we're trying to incorporate these differences with these social institutions to make them better, and we have these. And that's kind of like what we're trying to push. And we're trying to make a more better thing for everyone. That's kind of that's our mission.
Yeah, definitely. I'll have to sign off shortly, but what I think I'd like to say maybe in closing is that there's lots of black pills and lots of white pills to draw. I mean, I think the one thing people do need to understand is that yes, there is a lot of institutional power against the continuation of European civilization. There is a lot of there are the powers that be are really pushing a future that we don't want. But then I think the white pill to pull out of that is that, like, look, civilizations have always fallen, empires have always come to an end, but there's always something that comes out after. There's always something that comes out of that. There's always like something that rises, and Europeans have been throughout history probably the best at building that. And I don't think that throughout the Western world, we're all just going to go off into the night and just accept our fate and, just cease to exist. I don't think that's going to happen. And, what I think that people should do is don't spend too much time speculating about the future, but spend more figuring out the small things you can do now that'll make us better, make you better for tomorrow. The small things that you can do now, whether that's talking to your family members, whether it's standing up to the person that constantly is spouting off like anti-white rhetoric, or if it's finally reaching getting one of your buddies interested in history, or getting him interested in some kind of art or whatever it is, or if it's just improving yourself, who knows? Think of a small thing you can do today, and that's the best way to work toward a better goal for tomorrow. And I don't think that it doesn't help if to be overly black pilled, where you think that the entire world's going to come to an end and that there's going to be a war, and don't go down that path, because unproductive. Just I'd say you're only one person, and do what's within your power. I'd say that's the best course of action, really.
Yeah, and what we have to is just keep on fighting the good fight. Keep telling pushing the like, hey, here's a way. And I think this is something, as we explained throughout this conversation, is that here's where we can find purpose and identity, and a sort of awaken this line, this like I think this hole in the soul of people. As we explained throughout the thing, we are the most materially wealthy, we're the most interconnected, the most materially wealthy in all of history, and yet we're having some sort of hole in our hearts. And I think what we're trying to awaken in every single person, and this doesn't have to even apply to white people, but it's just people have a kinship to their own, and you have a greater group identity than just yourself. You're not an atomized individual. There are people like you out there, and there is a purpose for you. And our goal is to create, for the future, in an idealized future, it's a nation state for your own, where you could call your home, where you're connected to the soil, where you have family, community, where you have duties, and you have a greater calling and a greater identity than just yourself. It's again, it goes beyond than just meaningless iPhones and the newest gadgets and the drugs and the sex. There's more to your life, and it's always and the one thing is it's not just about rights too. It's duties that you place upon yourself. Always push to make yourself a better person. That means going to the gym, eating healthy, maybe doing community and charity work, pushing the narrative of healthy, racial and ethnic, and just your love for your heritage and history. As you say, bring about, look into, pushing, interesting arts and architectures and, histories, and, just like, look at something that gives you a sense of purpose. And that's how you awaken. It's just that just looking at your past and like, oh wow, there's something more to me. I'm not, there's a long chain that stretches back for thousands of years, and I'm the newest link, and I'm going to continue this chain into the future, and I'm going to improve this part of the chain. And I think that's our purpose, is to reawaken the consciousness of I guess the lost spirit of Europa and within all its people, and hopefully for a future where Europa and its descendants in America and Canada and Australia and New Zealand and such are a place they could recognize and a place they could feel pride in.
Yep. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Yep. So, hey, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think we talked for like 2.5 hours or something like that. So thank you so much.
I enjoyed it. Good conversation.
Thank you so much. I very interested. So, do you want me to? So I think this is automatically gets posted to my channel, I believe. But I hope it does. At least it worked the other time. But
yes, it does.
Alrighty. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on. I really like these discussions. I know there wasn't really much disagreement, but I think it's nice to kind of flesh out someone with our two different someone with a similar philosophy. I never thought about that, or I hope we just. I know we didn't disagree much, but it was a nice discussion, I hope. And
it's always interesting.
Yeah. Hey, so yeah, it's just hey, if you ever need anything just outside of politics, or if you want to do this again, I'm always up for it. And or if you have like another discussion, if you want to add me, that's fine. And if you want to, guys, if you want to subscribe to his name is Endeavor. He very great dude, and hey, even outside politics or whatever, if you need any help, I'm right there for you, dude.
Thanks.
All right, well, so I'll end that there. So aim high, wander on from America with Russian love.